Welcome back to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. We're going to start something a little new this season on Politics for the Culture. I want you to hashtag Pete the Pin. Look at the lapel pin, because the blue jacket stays consistent, but the lapel pin, real subtle, going to switch it up depending on the show. Going to have shows, of course, all of them going to have a subtle political statement. This is no different. This is my Africa passport pin. For those who've never been to the continent, definitely encourage you to go there. When we talk about politics for the culture, we talk about a broad diaspora of the culture, because what I love is that there's a commonality among Black folks, people of color across the globe. And if you have not had a chance to stamp your passport, please do so. The beauty of travel is that some folks do it for fun. Some folks do it for excitement. Other folks do it for learning. Some folks do it for a combination of all three. Back in 2016, I had the great opportunity to travel to Palestine. Now, Palestine, for some folks, you may be asking the question, well, where is that? Well, for a certain segment of the audience, when I say names like Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, those should be very familiar to you because of the religious practice that you may be a part of. Palestine sits in really the center of multiple Abrahamic faiths, whether it be Muslim, Jewish, Christian. This region of the world is super special. But unfortunately, some of the things that have been happening to the indigenous people of Palestine too often go unreported. When I had the opportunity to go in 2016, I had a chance to kind of see firsthand some of the experiences that folks are experiencing in that region of the world, because too oftentimes news stations don't report what's going on. But you're going to have a special opportunity on today's show to hear directly from somebody whose family is deeply impacted by what's going on in Palestine. So we're going to be doing a little bit of edutainment, if you will, right? And I want to welcome a friend of mine, new friend to the show, activist, political in her own right, but somebody I get to call friend, Rasha Mubarak, out of the beautiful city of Orlando. How you doing today, Rasha?
Hey. How you doing? This is amazing. So happy I can.
I don't know. Can you hear me, Rasha?
Yes. Can you hear me?
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Testing. You want to run it back? Hey, Rasha, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can't hear me?
Because I can't hear you.
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
I can hear you a little bit now. Sorry, we're going to run it back. We had a little audio difficulty there. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Test your mic, Rasha.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're going to run it back from the beginning. Sorry about that, Rasha. Little technical difficulties. Welcome back to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. We're going to start something new this season on Politics for the Culture. And I want you to hashtag Pete the Pin, right? If you look on my left shoulder, you're going to see a lapel pin change, real subtle. You know, for those who remember last season, spent a lot of time hyping up our return to Wakanda with the Black Panther pin. But this season, we're going to switch up the lapel pin periodically. This episode, I have my passport pin. For those who've never been to the African continent, definitely encourage folks to make sure you're visiting the continent. I've had a chance to go there twice myself. Looking forward to visiting again. Amazing experience, because when we think about the culture is across the diaspora. It's widespread. It's broad. And the beauty of communities of color, people of color, is that there's a common thread throughout. Some people visit other places for fun, some for adventure, others for education, and some do a composite of all three. During my travels, especially back in 2016, I had a chance to visit Palestine. Now, when I say Palestine, a lot of folks say, well, where is that? I haven't heard that terminology before. Well, the reality is when you think of places like Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, all those are in what we know as Palestine, or what I will refer to as Palestine. But too oftentimes, we don't hear enough about what is happening to the people of Palestine, people who identify as Palestinian. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I have the luxury of bringing in a friend who will now be a friend of the show, somebody whose family is deeply impacted, multi-generations of folks who go back and live in Palestine. Welcome to the show, none other than Rasha Mubarak, an activist, political in her own right, current resident of the beautiful city of Orlando. Rasha, welcome to Politics for the Culture.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's beautiful.
Thank you for being on the show. And we're going to definitely talk about, your level of activism, both internationally and locally. But because we have folks that are now maybe just hearing about Palestine for the first time, can you give people like a snapshot of what Palestine is, where Palestine is, and what does it mean to be someone of Palestinian heritage?
Absolutely. First off, thanks so much for having me and for welcoming this important conversation on your show. So I'm a daughter of Palestinian immigrants. My parents came here in the 70s. Palestine. A lot of people are like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, Palestine. They're like, oh, I know about Palestine. I think I went to a Pakistani wedding once. And I was like, nope, not the same. I'm always like, you know Jesus? They're like, yeah, I know Jesus. It's like, I'm from where Jesus was born. So Palestine is located in the Middle East. It is indigenous to the Palestinian people, descendants of all faiths, like you mentioned, Muslim, Christians, and Jews. In 1948, Palestinians were displaced, forced out of their homes, and murdered. So Palestinians, population of refugees in the entire world. Palestinians, we still exist. Our diaspora is huge because of 1948, when Israel came about and Zionism was born. The Palestinians became part of a large diaspora, but there are still Palestinians living on indigenous land. I have family members, first cousins, uncles, my grandfather's home in Palestine. So Palestinians have been in a 75-year struggle to return to their homeland, to fight for basic human rights, the ability to move, freedom, access to the basic human dignity that people across the globe should be able to acquire.
No doubt about it. And part of, people may ask the question, well, this is politics for the culture. We're having this conversation about this other region of the world. one of the reasons why I want to ground this conversation is because there's been a long history of Black Palestinian solidarity. When we think about folks like Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, Reverend Desmond Tutu, Angela Davis, the Black Panther Party, have all talked about and advocated for solidarity with Palestinian people. But more recently, taking it back to the Ferguson uprisings in 2015, there was this sort of reigniting of this notion of solidarity between these two folks. You know, when individuals were being tear gassed on the streets of Ferguson, as they were tweeting, as they were texting, as they were utilizing social media to bring attention to the struggle, you started to hear responses from the people of Palestine, basically instructing them on everything from how to deal with tear gas to how to keep a struggle going and continue them. Can you talk a little bit about kind of this more recent reigniting of the solidarity that these kind of two communities share, and why it's important for African Americans or Black people to understand about what's going on in Palestine?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important, like you said, to honor those who came before us. So the Black and Palestinian solidarity, like you said, is not new. It was definitely being established as early as 1964 when Malcolm X visited the land, 1967 when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee took a stance on Palestine. So you've seen so much of that lens really be born in around 1967. Of course, you mentioned Dr. Angela Davis, who received a letter from a political prisoner in Palestine the letter was smuggled from Israeli prison to Dr. Angela Davis's jail cell. So this is something that is deeply rooted in our intersectionality between the Palestinian and Black struggle. So I do want to honor those who came before us, and of course, Nelson Mandela and his anti-apartheid movement. So yes, this is not new, but it's absolutely has resurfaced in a way that is inspiring and hopeful and further deepens just our fight for liberation and equity for all people. As 2014, when we saw the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, and like you mentioned, there was a 50-day onslaught in Gaza, and people that were getting tear gas were able to still communicate to their Black siblings in the US how to best react and respond to tear gas and what people in Palestine, Palestine, Gaza are doing. So it's not so much that every struggle looks differently, but the state-sanctioned violence and settler colonialism and imperialism, and of course, how it's rooted in white supremacy is what connects us all. So we've been seeing so much of the solidarity, of course, understanding and acknowledging that none of us are free until we're all free. And of course, when we talk about how the police forces and law enforcement are trained by Israel and the Israel occupation forces, it's not to say that, Israel, the law enforcement agencies here or the state is influenced by Israel, right? This is how Black people have been treated in this country since its inception. But there is a connectedness on how it's the same systems that continue to oppress and murder Black lives here in the US. And of course, Palestinians, and of course, there's Afro-Palestinians in Palestine, and understanding that this is the same kind of systems that continue to oppress, occupy, and displace our people.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that level of enlightenment. But I guess let's shift slightly to a more lighter, more celebratory kind of space, right? You said, kind of in your opening, right? You're from where Jesus is from, right? And so we talk about this notion of Palestine being this place that is deeply rooted in all three of the Abrahamic faiths, right? Can you kind of speak to, what the joy of being a Palestinian person or being of Palestinian identity, what does that mean? How for somebody who's like, I'm watching this show today and I want to delve into what it looks like to experience Palestinian culture or joy, what are some of the things that they might be able to engage in outside of being able to physically travel to the region?
No, absolutely. I think that, being Palestinian is, people always say, how are you showing up for all these other issues around us, right? I'm like, it's easy. Being born to the struggle, I think that, I woke up, going to protests in downtown Orlando, and I thought that's what everybody did on the weekend. It's just, part of who we are. But obviously, there's joy in the resistance and learning how to channel some of that pain into power and into really celebrating our existence. And, for a long time, the arts have been a part of the resistance. I mean, you'll hear some folklore music, Palestinian music, that are played maybe like in weddings or joyful celebrations. But the history of it is how, how some of the wives were communicating to their husbands in the jail cells so that the IDF couldn't recognize or identify. They would add musical lyrics, right? So then you see the Palestinian folklore, which is Debka, which is a dance that is very much part of the resistance, but it's also used to celebrate joy. And so there's definitely the arts is a big part of our joy. Food. So I think there's always just take our land. You might try to separate our families, imprison our young children and men and women. But there's also a part of it that's talks about the food, that they're even stealing our food and our culture, right? Our music, our dances, and now even to the hummus, right? To the point where it's there's you can find readings around just what the history of the Palestinian food means in today. So when we're in the kitchen with our moms, learning our ancestors' best tasting, dessert, for instance, like kanafa, there's a long history there, right? It's just how do we keep our existence alive, right? And it's to resist. To continue to cook our food, speak our language, play our music. And what's really dope about it now is to see how is just influencing the younger generation, and of course across different communities. So you'll find a lot of people practicing joy in ways that they know how to show up, right? So I think there's collective joy and remembering that we're doing this until we're free, right? So I don't know if that's as joyful, but when it comes to being Palestinian, there is a lot of different ways of celebrating our existence.
Yeah, and I'm glad you centered that, because I wanted folks who view this, especially this episode, to understand that even in the midst of oppression and struggle, there is still this notion of cultural identity and joy that is a common thread, especially among oppressed people, right? And so we think about Black folks, Indigenous American people, Palestinians, folks who have really suffered some of the most gross indignities that the world can throw on somebody, that even in the midst of that, you still have this kind of deep-rooted culture that is oftentimes commodified, monetized by other people, and we have to make it a point to hold those things down. So I want to thank you for that. So here on Politics for the Culture, although we have these kind of in-depth discussions, we always like to have a little tongue-in-cheek moment, a little levity, if you will. And so I know that one of the largest group of Palestinians exist in the suburbs around good old Detroit, Michigan, right? And so we think about Detroit, Motown, if you will, home of not only so many Palestinian Americans, but of Motown Records, right? And of course, there's significant cultural value to that space. As somebody who's visited that area, can you kind of touch on maybe a few R&B songs or rap songs that the good old folks in places around Detroit might vibe to, that we don't know would be like the best song to play? Like if you walked up in a Palestinian party and you said, "Hey, throw on some Tupac," that is going down. So give us some insight on kind of some shared cultural norms between Black and brown people when it comes to how to have a good time amongst our Palestinian brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Well, first I want to gently correct you, because most of the largest Palestinian population you're going to find, I think, is competing between New Jersey and Chicago. Dearborn, Michigan has the largest Arab population, which there are a lot of Lebanese. Of course,
thank you for that. Thank you for that correction. Shout out to my folks in Chicago and Jersey.
So so absolutely. But one Palestinian artist actually originated. He definitely claimed Detroit. Not sure if he was born there, but definitely spent a lot of time and raised. He actually paints a lot of the murals in the Bay Area in California. He's also an artist, a musical lyric, how you say, genius, lyrical genius, right? Like, he's pretty dope in that sense. I think if you throw a lot of I know from the Palestinians that I know, they relate to a lot of just the hip hop music. I think there's this young rapper in Gaza that so many hip hop artists reach out to him from the US to like encourage him, support him. I'll send you his link, but there is definitely influence there. And I think that there is also a place of healing where people find comfort in a lot of the lyrics, because the different experiences, right? But there's shared struggles in that. So just like a lot of, the hip hop artists, the history of them, they come from like the Black liberation movement, right? So a lot of it is really deeply rooted in that kind of language. So I think that a lot of Palestinians, like, you'll find them either vibing or creating their own kind of music. But absolutely, I think you'd be safe if you started playing Tupac. But there's also they're gonna have their own opinions around Tupac and Biggie and all of that. So that I won't get into. But
totally understand. And I want to thank you first and foremost for coming on the show, really kind of sharing insight and getting people kind of really aware of what's going on. We know, and just to kind of ground us, there is a serious, serious acts of political violence that are falling upon the Palestinian people at this very moment. And so we really do want to send all kinds of positivity, prayers to the people of Palestine who are experiencing that level of state violence at this very moment. And I don't want to lose sight of that, even as we're talking about joy, because we understand that even in the midst of the chaos and midst of the pain, people still have to exist and still have to find joy in those things. So I want to thank you for being a stalwart representative of your people, never flinching when it comes to advocating for the Palestinian people. And to paraphrase another Palestinian who's close to the folks here in Miami, we the best. Shout out to DJ Khaled. For those who did not know, he is of Palestinian descent as well. But I want to thank you for coming on the show, Rasha. And just as we're leaving out, are there any sort of reference points, websites where people can learn more about how they can support Palestinian solidarity that you want to leave with the folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Just continue to show up the best that you know how. You can visit USCPR, the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, Adala Justice Project. The IMEU has a lot of different publications if you want to catch up on readings. Dr. Angela Davis's book and Mark Lamont Hill's book that you can just Google their name with Palestine. You'll find it. All good readings, all good organizations that I highly encourage. You also just do your readings and, of course, support where you know how to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. And once again, another episode of Politics for the Culture, where we talk about, literally politics for the culture. Cultures abroad, cultures across the diaspora, and we definitely want to make sure we're highlighting folks who the culture needs to know about. And the Palestinian people definitely need not only our prayers, but our support. So thank you for being on the show, Rasha.